Conversation. So I am joined today by Dr. Joe Savage, who is the Senior Regional Advisor at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. Joe is a recognized leader with over 20 years of experience in the fields of homelessness, social policy, economic development, and human services administration. His prior work experience encompasses positions in which he was responsible for overseeing transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, continuum of care funding, strategic planning, and coalition building. So with that, I am going to pass it over to you, Joe. Jen, can you stop sharing? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Gail and Jen, for having me for that great introduction. Gail, I like that play on all in. Yes, we are all in right now on this webinar to hear about the new federal strategic plan, all in. And so it's always a pleasure to be here with the Alliance. I'm just going to get my screen up here. All right, you should all be seeing the PowerPoint screen that has the title of the plan and all in, the federal strategic plan to prevent and end homelessness. And my goal today is to give you an overview of all in. If you want to get into a lot of the specific strategies, then I do encourage you to go to our website and download the actual plan. And that way you can really dig into the nuts and bolts and details of the plan itself. And there will be a link at the end of this presentation where you can go access the plan. And then, as mentioned, a copy of this PowerPoint presentation will be distributed to those who have registered for this webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. As introduced, my name is Joe Savage. I'm one of 5 senior regional advisors at USICH. I'm based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I cover the Mid-Atlantic and Southeastern states. And essentially, I serve as your bridge between what's going on with you all at the local level and the federal government. So I help you all understand federal policy and how that translates into implementation at the local level. Then I also take feedback from you all and I inform our federal partners about what's going on the ground and what are some of those best practices and innovations that's happening on the ground. So please feel free to take down my email address, reach out to me if you ever have any questions about the federal strategic plan, have any questions about any federal programs or policies and need clarification, etc. Please feel free to reach out to me via email. That's shown here on this slide. All right, so just in case, for some of you who aren't familiar with USICH, we are the federal government's only agency that's solely responsible for developing federal policy as it relates to homelessness. And the way that we do this, we coordinate 19 federal agencies around the issue of homelessness so that there is a common goal, a common vision for what it means to end homelessness. Rather than having each entity operating in its own silo, we really work to break down that fractionalized work, and so that there is a common vision, a common goal amongst the 19 federal agencies pertaining to what it means to prevent and end homelessness. And you may have heard recently about our all of government approach, which has been put into place at the federal level through a number of executive orders. And we are really serious about really making sure that all of government approach and all hands on deck approach is happening at the federal level as it pertains to preventing and end homelessness. And so we coordinate the 19 federal agencies through our council. And currently the chair of council is VA Secretary Dennis McDonough, and the vice chair is HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra. And so we, through the work of our council that typically consists of the secretaries of these agencies, that is how we accomplish the work that we do as far as developing and implementing federal policy and developing and coordinating that common vision and goal for what it means to end homelessness. So what we're going to do today is I'm first going to talk about the state of homelessness, give you some numbers, talk about the input process that we did to develop All In, then give an overview of the plan, then talk about what our plan is for implementation and how we will monitor progress, and then at the end, an opportunity to answer any questions that you all may have. So as far as the state of homelessness is concerned, these numbers are based on 2020 point in time count numbers, as well as 2020 data from Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. And this is just meant to give you a snapshot nationally of what homelessness looked like in terms of what we saw in those counts across the nation. 1.25 million folks experiencing sheltered homelessness. Then HHS looking at those who came in contact with health center programs administered by HRSA, 1.29 million. Students from Department of Education data in 2020, 1.28 million, and then approximately 580,000 experiencing homelessness on a single night in 2020. And so this is basically the national snapshot. And then to give you an idea of that breakdown, we know that 60% of those experiencing homelessness tend to be sheltered, whereas 40% unsheltered. But we do know from the data, when it comes down to singles, down to individuals, individuals tend to be unsheltered, experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And this is the slide, I believe the next one. Nope, not yet. One of the other things that you may have been hearing us emphasize at the federal level, the racial disparities that exist within the homeless population. We have been encouraging communities to look at their data so that they can understand the disproportionate impact that homelessness has on persons of color. And this is data demonstrating that disproportionate impact nationwide. And so we have been encouraging communities to look at their data to understand whether or not the same disproportionate impact exists within your homeless community, and encouraging communities to really take an equity approach to addressing the issue of homelessness, which really involves bringing multiple players to the table. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in just a bit. But these are just the national numbers showing the disproportionate impact of homelessness on persons of color. So this is the slide I wanted to get to as far as our overall progress is concerned. Looking at 2010 as the base year, 2010 was the year that the first federal strategic plan was released. That was opening doors. So if we look at our data from 2010 with the first strategic plan up into 2022, which was the last full point in time count data that has been reported. Most communities just got finished doing their 2023 point in time count. Overall homelessness is down by 33%. We've seen an uptick in chronic homelessness by 4%, and that increase has primarily been on coastal cities, particularly on the West Coast, where the cost of housing is really skyrocketing and is really causing an increase in unsheltered homelessness. Family homelessness is down by 36%, and veterans homelessness is down by 55%. That is a huge reduction amongst veterans, and the key reason for that reduction is the fact that Congress put up the resources, and through such programs as HUD-VASH, SSVF, as well as other flexibilities that came through the VA, this really sends a message as to the progress we can make when the appropriate resources are put on the table. When we get those resources, we can really make a dent. And youth homelessness on the end there, the reason why that's NA is that the base year that we're using to measure our progress against youth homelessness is 2017. And so we're currently putting those numbers together so that we can see what that is. But I can tell you, looking at the 2020 point in time count numbers and comparing them to 2022, youth homelessness decreased by 12%. And I think something just happened to my screen. Okay, there it is. It's back. But from 2020 to 2022, youth homelessness decreased by 12%. So as far as the input process around All In, we did over 80 listening sessions, and we actually did a listening session at the Housing Alliances Conference that December, where we were conducting and gathering those feedback sessions. We also opened up an online portal where any and everyone could give their comments, give their input. And we actually did a qualitative data analysis of over 1,500 specific comments. We also made sure that we reached out to key stakeholders, particularly persons with lived experience, as well as national organizations and national experts. And then, of course, within our council, amongst the 19 federal agencies, we also gathered input, feedback, and comments from our federal partners. So this was a very comprehensive input process, very comprehensive listening sessions, and we were very intentional about ensuring that we take those key themes and that we make sure that we are developing a federal strategic plan that is really speaking to the key challenges and barriers that we heard from these listening sessions. So some of the things that we heard as far as challenges for most of you who have been, in this work, and we certainly appreciate all the work that you've been doing, the hard work that you've been putting in, especially over the last few years with experiencing the pandemic. We do appreciate the work that you all have been doing on the ground at the policy level as well. A lot of these challenges are very familiar to most of you all as it relates to the lack of affordable housing, housing costs increasing, as well as not being able to access necessary supports. A lot of these challenges that are listed in the federal strategic plan, many of you are experiencing. We were very sensitive, and we really wanted to make sure that we really listened to rural communities to understand what their challenges are. One of the big pieces of feedback that we got was that previous federal strategic plans really didn't speak to rural communities. So we were really sensitive to making sure that we looked at those challenges as well as opportunities experienced by rural communities. I won't read each of these individually. You'll get a copy of the PowerPoint, and you can also get more detail in the federal strategic plan. So these were some of the biggest challenges that we heard through our input process, and then some of the biggest opportunities that we heard through our input process. Of course, the unprecedented amount of funding that came through the American Rescue Plan, as well as the CARES Act, as well as the president's budget. We encourage communities that we don't know if this type of funding is ever going to be seen again. So take it, run with it, take it as far as you can go, get changes on the book that you can make permanent, and that way you can run with this ball as far as possible. And certainly the all of government approach, the dedicated commitment that we've had at the federal level through a number of executive orders, as well as other action plans. If you get the federal strategic plan, you will actually get a list of the executive orders that apply to our all of government approach, our dedication, as well as links to some of these action plans that you see listed here. So under demonstrated commitment, you see the Housing Supply Action Plan, as well as the National Mental Health Strategy, National Drug Control Strategy, and executive orders. If you download a copy of the actual plan, you will get links to those action plans, strategies, and executive orders. And then, of course, there were a lot of lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we were making sure that we're paying attention to the innovations that came out of a lot of the work that was being done in communities, and seeing what can we take, what can we make permanent, what can we help communities to continue to implement as far as some of those innovative strategies that communities did during the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, so let's take a look at All In. If you go to our website, as you see there on the left, usich.gov/FSP, that's where you can get a copy. And then, of course, if you go straight to our page, you're going to see a big pop-up. I mean, you can access the plan that way. And what I want to do is I just want to go over the key solutions as well as the pillars of the plan. And as I mentioned, you can get a copy of the plan that will go into more detail, give you more information about specific strategies. But But one of the key things that I want to emphasize about All In, when you begin to read it, you will see that it is really a plan that focuses on federal action. And that's a bit different from prior strategic plans. Prior strategic plans had goals and objectives, but a lot of the strategies focused on what communities can do and really highlighted a lot of those best practices. Well, this particular plan is focusing on the actions that we will take as the federal government to meet specific goals and objectives. And then in supplemental materials that we're going to be releasing throughout the year, throughout the upcoming years, that's when you'll see us begin to talk about specific strategies and best practices for communities. And we're going to be linking those strategies and best practices to the federal actions that you see in the federal strategic plan. So keep that in mind as you read it, as you go through it, that it is a roadmap for federal action. And one of the key points of emphasis in the plan is the all of government approach that the Biden-Harris administration has really began to put forth. And what we want communities to do is to really take this plan and use it as a template to develop your local as well as state plans, and then really help it to look at, okay, how can we look at these federal actions and these federal resources and implement effective systems at the local level with these resources. So as far as the plan is concerned, there is an overall goal for the reduction of homelessness, and that goal is to reduce overall homelessness by 25% by 2025. And the base year for that is 2022. So by 2025, looking at our data from 2022 to 2025, our goal is a 25% reduction in overall homelessness. We are encouraging local communities as well as states to set their own ambitious goal to be reached by 2025. And again, structuring and developing a plan that looks at those resources locally or those resources at the state level that can be allocated strategically in order to achieve a reduction goal by 2025. So as far as All In is concerned, the reduction goal is an overall reduction of 25% by 2025, with 2022 being the base year. So some of you who are familiar with prior strategic plans know that we in those plans broke it out by subpopulations. This particular plan does not have a focus on subpopulations in the sense that there is a section in the plan for youth, a section in the plan for families, a section in the plan for chronically homeless individuals, families. This plan, we are using an approach that we're calling targeted universalism. And essentially, we want you to look at your local data, and the approach that we're going to take at the federal level is that overall universal reduction in homelessness, and we want you all to do the same at the local level. However, we understand that in order to achieve an overall reduction in homelessness, based on your local data, it may best serve your community to target specific resources or to target specific programs that are relevant to a subpopulation. For example, for one community, their local data may say, you know what, we have the resources that we can really make a huge reduction in veterans homelessness, and that will help us achieve an overall reduction in homelessness. So we're going to target resources and programs specifically for veterans. So when we talk about targeted universalism, we're talking about an overall reduction in homelessness, but using your local data and your local resources to be flexible as far as targeting specific subpopulations and targeting specific programs that will help you really drive your progress towards that overall reduction. So you won't see a specific emphasis on subpopulations in All In. So the way All In is structured, there is the solutions portion that is based on three key principles: housing and supports, crisis response, and prevention. And then the overall plan is based on three pillars in its foundation of equity, data and evidence, and collaboration. So what I want to do now is go over these foundations as well as the three pillars for these solutions. All right. So the first foundational pillar, leading with equity. One of the key things that you will see with this federal strategic plan, rather than having a section on equity, equity is weaved throughout the plan from the first page to the last page, and really driving home the point that if we're going to address the issue of homelessness and we understand the disproportionate impact on persons of color, it must be done through an equity lens, and equity has to be weaved throughout. So communities looking at their coordinated entry systems, their assessments, etc., and then the plan outlining what actions we've taken at the federal level to make sure that we are leading with equity. One of the key things when we talk about equity is being inclusive in the decision-making process involving persons with lived experience. And the thing that I often emphasize when we talk about involving persons with lived experience, we want communities to do it in a meaningful way where they actually have decision-making authority and they're involved in the decision-making process. And I can't tell you how many times I go to roundtables and, you know, federal officials are there, state, local providers are there, and the same thing happens every time. We go through all of the federal spiel, local spiel, provider spiel, and then at the end of the session, we turn to the persons with lived experience and we ask them to share their story, and then the session ends. In my opinion, that's not leading with equity. We're putting their voice last, and usually you're running out of time, and now they have to give their story in simply 2 minutes. When we talk about leading with equity, I really want you to understand doing that in a meaningful way means putting their voice first and hearing their voice first. And that is extremely important when we talk about being all-inclusive and including persons with lived experience. And then, of course, one of the huge things that we're doing at the federal level, our partner agencies are looking at their policies and practices to see if federal policy and practices are perpetuating racial disparities that we're seeing within the homelessness system. And in the plan, there are actually a list of a number of executive orders that have been issued by President Biden to our federal agencies to begin to look at their policies and practices as it pertains to equity. All right, the next foundational pillar, using data and evidence to make decisions. We really are looking to see how we can strengthen data at the federal level so that it can be shared, it can be coordinated across federal agencies. What resources can we provide to help you all strengthen data sharing at the state and local levels? And then what can we do to support innovation and research as it relates to data sharing? So one of the things that you'll see in All In will be a list of those federal resources, as well as the actions that we've already taken at the federal level to really increase data sharing so that you're developing your systems based on your local data and really allowing you the flexibility to develop a system that meets the needs of your local communities. The next foundational pillar, collaborate at all levels. You may have heard at the federal level, we're using the terminology an all of government approach. I emphasize with communities, we want you all to look at an all of community approach and really understanding the importance that collaboration and partnership really plays in addressing the issue of homelessness. We know that homelessness is a systemic issue, meaning it involves many systems from prevention all the way to solutions. And if we're talking about, you know, addressing the racial disparities, that involves additional systems. And so we really understand that it really takes the collaboration and the partnerships. And I often emphasize with communities, you know, if you really want to develop those strong collaborations and partnerships, it's always best to have something in writing. There is a lot of turnover within this work, within the field of social work, within the field of public policy, etc. And, you know, especially when we talk about local, state, and federal governments, elections, etc. When things are in writing, that can really give a permanency to a lot of the partnerships and a lot of the collaborations, whether it's through memorandums of understanding, letters of agreements, state statutes, legislation, you know, etc. But really finding a way to really solidify and make permanent these collaborations and partnerships so that they are lasting. All right, so moving on to one of the solution pillars. So the three pillars that I just went over were the foundational pillars for the overall plan. So now when we talk about the solutions, we're talking about three pillars within those solutions. So scale housing and support to meet demand. And of course, this is huge in terms of providing communities with the necessary resources to meet the demand. So at the federal level, we are committing to finding ways to maximize existing federal resources. How can we expand and how can we create new opportunities? If you go to the federal plan and you click on the link to look at the Housing Supply Action Plan, and in the section of All In, under this strategy, you'll also find the Housing Supply Action Plan. But within that action plan, there are a number of key strategies that the Biden-Harris administration is taking to create new and expand existing supply of affordable housing. And those strategies start with not only the creation of affordable housing through such programs as the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, but also how can communities look at zoning and permitting processes in order to decrease the cost of developing housing and therefore making it more affordable. So we've really began in this plan to look at how we at the federal level can maximize those resources, how we can look at waivers and assisting communities in removing regulatory barriers. How can we expand the existing supply of affordable housing? A key emphasis under this particular solution pillar is fair housing and further promoting and strengthening fair housing and reducing housing discrimination. And then also looking at trauma-informed services and really making sure that the services that are being provided and the housing that's being provided coupled with those services are indeed trauma-informed. And what are those resources that we can provide at the federal level to promote the use of trauma-informed supportive services? So scaling housing and support to meet the demand, the key document under this pillar is the Housing Supply Action Plan. And I encourage you, in addition to looking at the federal strategic plan All In, also download a copy of the Housing Supply Action Plan and looking at the strategies that are set forth there. All right, the next solutions pillar, improve homelessness response systems. And really, this particular pillar and the strategies that are here focus on what we can do at the federal level to really promote an all-of-government approach to really assist state and local communities in strengthening their response systems. One of the key things and one of the key strategies, many of your communities may have applied for funding under the unsheltered NOFO, and then also looking at our federal requirements as far as, let's say, the COC program is concerned, looking at what we have as requirements for coordinated entry systems and really looking to reevaluate those requirements to make sure that not only are communities developing coordinated entry systems that are promoting equity, but that they're really systems that are effective. So we're really taking a look at our policies that we've imposed upon communities as it relates to coordinated entry and seeing where we can improve those policies. One of the things that we saw during the COVID pandemic was the building of strong relationships between COCs and local public health entities. And so this plan really puts forth an emphasis on how we at the federal level can help COCs and local public health entities improve that relationship and maintain that relationship. A lot of those relationships were really key and valuable in stemming the spread of COVID amongst the homeless population, but we want these relationships to continue and want communities to expand upon those relationships. I'm not going to read every single bullet point on this slide. Again, get the plan. It'll go into greater detail with a lot of the strategies and resources that we will be providing at the federal level to help communities improve their homelessness response systems. The next solution pillar, preventing homelessness. So All of this is great and wonderful, but if we don't turn off the faucet, it means absolutely nothing. And that was something that we heard from a lot of communities, a lot of stakeholders during our input sessions. Prior federal strategic plans really didn't have enough emphasis on prevention. And so we wanted to be intentional about having an emphasis on prevention. And so as you can see, prevention is one of the solution pillars in all in. And so we really want you to understand when we talk about, prevention, this is helping people maintain the housing that they are currently in, if it's safe and, if it can be made affordable, helping people to maintain that housing versus diversion, where they've already lost the housing and they're knocking on the door to come into your system and diverting them from entering the system. So when we talk about prevention, we're really talking about helping people maintain their housing. A key emphasis in all in under prevention relates to the disabled and older adults. One of the key populations that we heard during our input sessions that often went neglected in prior federal strategic plan was the aging, the older adult population. And so you will see a number of strategies around our resources at the federal level that we will be disseminating to help promote housing stability amongst the aging older adult population, as well as those who are disabled. And a lot of those solution strategies fall under this particular solution pillar within the federal strategic plan. And so prevention is key, and I encourage you, there's a lot of good stuff in there as far as the resources that we will be providing at the federal level to help communities really scale up their prevention efforts. And a lot of this is what I just talked about as far as housing instability for older adults and people with disabilities. And then also throughout the plan, we talked about earlier the equity emphasis that is weaved throughout the plan. One of the key populations, American Indian and Alaska Native populations, as well as tribal communities. We really were intentional about making sure that we're weaving equitable strategies relating to those particular populations throughout the plan. So those are the three foundations of the plan, the three pillars that form the foundation of the plan, and then the three solution pillars through which the various strategies that we will be implementing at the federal level are weave through. What I want to do now is talk about our plans for implementing all in. And so what we're going to do, you have the federal strategic plan. We will be releasing a number of implementation plans that will really get into those solution pillars that I just went over and really get into the strategies that are listed there and really provide that roadmap for how we will implement those actions, as well as any connected milestones. And one of the key things that we want to do, we just didn't want to develop a federal strategic plan, release it, and then that be the end of the story. But we want to make sure that this is actually an evolving plan. So along with those implementation plans, we are going to continue to solicit feedback from you all. We are going to set up, as you see that second to last bullet point, an annual performance management plan. And we're going to use that to monitor our progress. And then using our progress from the performance management plan, along with your feedback, we plan to update the federal strategic plan on an annual basis. And that update might come through supplemental materials. I wouldn't look at an update as an actual, let's say, revision of the entire federal strategic plan, but through supplemental materials, we're really going to seek to continue to update and improve this plan. So it's an evolving document. It's not static. And that's one of the key things I want to emphasize with you all. So we will be developing implementation plans, an annual performance management plan. We will continue to solicit feedback from you all, and we will be updating the plan annually. So in terms of measuring progress, looking at some of the data points that we're going to be using, of course, the overall homeless population, we're going to be looking at racial disparities, children and youth. One of the key indicators will be length of time homeless. and then also returns to homelessness within 6 to 12 months and within 2 years. Those are some of the key data indicators, along with people who become homeless for the first time, and then placement in and retention of housing from street outreach. And the reason why that last data point is key, one of the key principles that is emphasized throughout the entire federal strategic plan is housing first. And when we talk about housing first, we're talking about true fidelity to what housing first means. It's not just getting someone into housing. It's not just placing someone directly from the street and into housing, but it's the housing along with the necessary services and supports for that individual, for that family, for that youth, so that they can maintain that housing and be stably housed over the long term. So again, when we're talking about housing first, we're talking about the housing along with the services, and that is a key principle that is weaved throughout all in. So these are some of the key data points that we're going to be looking at to measure our progress. And again, the goal that is set forth in all in is a 25% reduction in the overall homeless population by 2025, with the base year being 2022. All right, so what can you all do at the state, at the local level? We are encouraging you, if your state or your local community does not have a plan, to develop one. If you do have one, take a look at it, see if it needs to be revised, if it needs to be updated, and then really look at what's in the federal strategic plan. Take what's in all in as far as the resources that we are committing to at the federal level, and then using that to guide the development of your state and local plans, whether it's a new plan or whether it's revising an existing plan. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we've set a goal for a 25% reduction by 2025. We want you all to set your own local goal based on your data and what you all feel you can achieve, setting your own ambitious goal to reduce overall homelessness by a particular percentage by 2025, again, using 2022 as your base year. And again, targeting your resources based on your local data and what your system looks like and what the homeless population looks like within your specific community, developing that goal, and then developing that plan that outlines how to make the most strategic use of those resources. This third bullet point is key, and this is my true soapbox. I teach social welfare policy, the history of social welfare policy. And believe it or not, you know, the way social welfare policy started out, you had the worthy and the unworthy poor. The worthy poor were those who were impoverished due to circumstances beyond, quote unquote, their control. So we're talking about the widow, the orphan, etc. But then you had the unworthy poor, and those were considered those who were impoverished as a result of their own fault or some moral flaw. So the unworthy poor didn't get social services. That's sort of how social policy in our country started out. Believe it or not, that perception still exists. And so a lot of the challenges and a lot of the difficulties that we experience with getting good social welfare policy developed and supported with resources from the federal government really has to do with that perception still existing within Congress, that you have the worthy poor and the unworthy poor, and that those who are experiencing homelessness, particularly those with a dual diagnosis, it's a result of it's a moral flaw. It's a result of a fault of their own. So therefore, they are responsible for getting their own selves together. So really educating people about the causes and the challenges around homelessness and the true nature of homelessness, and really getting rid of those misperceptions and getting rid of those myths. Homelessness is not the result of someone's moral flaw. We have a lot of systemic failures in the social safety net within our country. We have a lot of institutional and structural racism that has discriminated against persons of color when it comes to accessing home ownership and affordable housing. And a lot of these things have led to what we're seeing today within our homeless crisis. And so really educating people about the true nature of homelessness, the true causes and the true challenges is very key. And then, of course, We released this federal strategic plan all in. We talked about the implementation steps that we're going to take, developing the performance management plan, continuing to get feedback from you all, updating the plan annually. Please hold us accountable. Hold us accountable to what we are committing to in this federal strategic plan. And if you find something, shoot me an email. Hey, Joe, you guys said in all in that you will provide X, Y, and Z resources. It's going on a year and a half. We're not seeing anything. Hold us accountable to what we're committing to in all in. That is very key. And then, as I mentioned before, throughout the plan, you will see various links to other action plans, other strategy plans, executive orders. Please take your time, go through the plan, click on those links, read about these other federal strategies, read about the executive orders, so you can be fully informed about what's happening at the federal level when we talk about preventing and ending homelessness. So these are the steps that you can take. Looking at your local plans, developing or revising those plans, setting your own ambitious goal to be achieved by 2025, educating about the true nature of homelessness, combating NIMBYism, holding us accountable, and then making sure you're fully informed about what we have going on at the federal level through other action plans, strategies, and executive orders. So these are just a number of ways that you can follow us. You can certainly look us up on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. If you go to our website to download the plan, our website will not allow you to leave without giving you an opportunity to sign up for a newsletter. I encourage you to get on our mailing list. That way, when anything is released, whether it's those performance management plans, evaluation plans, implementation plans, etc., you will be fully informed. And then again, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my email address is joe.savage, S-A-V as in Victor, A-G-E, at USICH.gov. Joe.savage at USICH.gov. And I think nowadays my last name, for some reason, is very popular, and my daughter kind of keeps me informed as to why. So that's an easy last name to remember. Joe.savage at USICH.gov. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And this is the link where you can go to get a copy of the Federal Strategic Plan, USICH.gov/FSP. And so I believe we are now ready for any questions that showed up in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that great presentation. Really, really appreciate it. So I do have one quick question. There was a pretty big announcement earlier this week that the president is not going to extend the federal public emergency. Now, you had mentioned the unprecedented funding.
Yep.
Is the end of that public emergency going to have any impact on that funding?
So as far as American Rescue Plan, as far as CARES Act funding, the end of the emergency will not impact that funding. And not only will it not impact that funding, but something that we're doing, and this is mentioned in all in, a lot of the waivers that communities were given as a result of the pandemic emergency, we're looking at ways that those waivers can remain permanent. Not saying all of them, but we're hearing from communities what waivers need to stay in place post-pandemic. And so we're also taking a look at that. But no, American Rescue Plan and CARES Act funding will not be affected.
All right, but waivers may be affected a little bit.
Right, exactly. Waivers may be affected, exactly. Yep.
Great, thank you. Our first question is talking about housing authorities. Can you talk about the role housing authorities have in addressing homelessness? Is there any accountability from HUD for housing authorities joining in the work in addressing homelessness? COCs are required to partner with housing authorities, but housing authorities don't seem to have the same mandate.
Yep, and that's a great question. Whoever answered that question is probably experiencing the frustrations of what it's like to build a partnership with a local housing authority. So yes, we encourage communities, particularly COCs, to partner with housing authorities. The thing about housing authorities is that they are quasi-governmental entities. So they're essentially independent, but there is some government oversight, but it's not a lot of oversight where things can be mandated needed. And so a lot of what I encourage communities to do is perhaps use your mayor, use your local city council to really help put some weight behind your call to the housing authority to be a good partner at the table. That's what a lot of communities do when they reach out to me. They say, Joe, we're having trouble getting our housing authority on board. Can you please help us navigate that relationship? And, you know, I work with communities, I work with their local housing authorities to really help bridge and develop that relationship. But to answer the question directly, because they are that funky quasi-governmental entity, there isn't a lot that we can do to mandate housing authorities to partner with COCs. However, we just encourage communities to try to use whatever local support, local political support that you can garner to help forge and develop that relationship. And then also I can connect people with peer cities who have done that successfully, and they can share with you their strategies that they've implemented to develop that relationship.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Somebody was asking if you have any materials or trainings to share on the history of homelessness. Can we find that on the USICH website?
So that's a great question. On our USICH website, you'll find a lot of strategies. You'll find a lot of best practices as far as it relates to addressing homelessness. If you want to get into the history of homelessness, particularly within the United States, I encourage you to go to the National Alliance to End Homelessness's website, www.n as in no, AEH.org. They have some very great information on the history of homelessness in the United States. But on our website, you will find a lot of information on strategies and best practices that are currently being used.
Great. So going back to one of the slides, the slide that showed 908,000 people were entering into homelessness with 901,000 exiting homelessness annually. Where did that data come from? Was it the AHAR?
I believe that's the AHAR. Let me see if it was footnoted on the slide. It's not, but I believe that is AHAR data. That would be AHAR data.
All right. The affordability of many LIHTC rental units will expire in the next few years. Does the All-In Plan have specific goals and objectives to preserve these LIHTC funded affordable units?
Yes, the plan will talk about specific steps that we're trying to take at the federal level to preserve affordability and really helping states understand what they can do statewide as far as low-income housing tax credit is concerned and qualified allocation plans. But yes, that is in there. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that runs us through all of our questions. Again, I want to thank you so much for coming and, oh, got another one that popped up at the last minute. Can you speak to the balance of supportive increases in affordable housing with emergency sheltering?
So I'm not sure what they're asking exactly in terms of the balance between I guess making sure that there's enough affordable housing on the back end for people to exit emergency shelter, or
I think it's the challenge of communities. You want to connect people to permanent housing as quickly as possible, but there's always going to be a need for emergency shelter. And so,
gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
How is that balance?
Gotcha. So the way emergency shelter is structured in the plan, number one, we learned a lot from the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of non-congregate shelter. So All-In really takes the approach of reimagining emergency shelter in terms of what it looks like, how it should be structured, and then how much emergency shelter should a community have. Now the question is kind of resonating with me. And so we're talking about, you know, some people going straight from the street into permanent housing, people moving out of emergency shelter into permanent housing in a decent amount of time. What is that right balance of emergency shelter that a community should have versus its permanent housing? I would say if you really just take a look at your data and you really look at your inflow and your exits, and when we're talking about exits, we're talking about the exits into permanent housing, the exits into transitional housing for whom if that's appropriate, and really seeing where the flow is in your system, and then looking at your current census to really understand, okay, if we look at our current census and we do an analysis of what's most appropriate for these individuals, permanent housing, transitional housing, or emergency shelter, that can inform you about the amount of emergency shelter that you need to have. And so it's really a matter of just looking at your data, seeing what's the appropriate resource for each individual, and then from that determining the amount of emergency shelter, the amount of transitional housing, and the amount of permanent housing that you need in your system. We're actually in the process of doing a national analysis to determine the amount of permanent supportive housing that we need to address homelessness.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Is emergency sheltering contrary to housing first in any way?
No, it's not contrary to housing first, simply because with an emphasis on housing first and taking people directly from the street and into housing, that housing may not be available today. It may need to get inspected. There may be something else that needs to be taken care of before the person can move into it. The unit is there. They are connected to it. However, in the meantime, for the next week or 14 days until whatever issue gets straightened out, emergency shelter is appropriate to provide that immediate access to shelter while that permanent housing resource is being made ready.
Great. Thank you. So I think we've run through all of our questions, and I want to thank the audience for putting forth such really thoughtful questions to keep this conversation going. We look forward to seeing all of the different phases of implementation coming out, and we hope to have you back for yet another listening session when it comes time for us to check in with you to let you know how you're doing.
Thank you so much, Gail. And again, sign up for our newsletter. That way, when we release those implementation plans, you will be fully informed. Thank you again, and please feel free to reach out to me anytime, folks.